Hey everyone, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And today is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week. But this, if you couldn't tell if you're watching this, not listening to it, is a very special breaches of the week because we're going to be focusing on one specific breach. And the person at the center of that breach is with me here. This is Chris Wolski. And quite frankly, he's got a very interesting story to tell. And Chris, why don't you tell my audience exactly what your job title is and who you work for?
Sure, I'm the Director of Information Security for the Port of Houston, here in Houston, Texas.
Great. Now, obviously, that is part of the U.S. critical infrastructure. It's one of the largest ports that we have here, so it's very important. And recently, you guys had a bit of an incident, and I'd love my audience to understand what that was. If you can explain it.
Sure. So what happened was, it's like any other day, right? You sitting there, you go talking and whatnot. Me and my security engineer were just finishing up our one-on-one, and we're like, hey, we just got an alert about something. And we're like, all right, let's check it out. And just at the surface level, like anything else, it's like, oh, this is probably just a false positive because somebody, one of the engineers in the organization are sitting there doing some work on the server or something like that. And we kind of blew it off, and then, another false positive, check that off in the box. Go to lunch with my boss and one of my peers, and then we get a phone call. And he's like, yeah, I'm taking the server offline right now. We're like, oh, really? And then he sends me a message and look at my phone. I'm like, yeah, this is definitely not good. So, we get back, and as soon as we get back, the server was offline. I immediately, started doing the incident response plan and say, okay, I had the server engineers all sit there and go, and basically because it was a virtual server, so we just did a snapshot real quick, caught everything that was still in memory. The attacker was completely cut off from communicating, so we were really in a good spot right then to sit there and say, okay, let's go back and figure out what really happened. We weren't sure. I mean, initial indications were we thought maybe it was something coming from the actual manufacturer, the producer of the software, the developer, right? So we're like, oh crap, another SolarWinds, type of
Right,
thing,
right,
because some of the indications were that there's a file name called reportgenerate.jsp, and you open it up and you look at this at the JavaScript, you're like, man, it's professionally written, it looks really sharp,
right.
like, and you look at it real quick, you can't really tell what it's supposed to be doing. I'm not a JavaScript guy, and so I'm like, well, it looks kind of decent to me. And then we started looking at it, and then we got told it was a web shell. I'm like, oh, neat,
Yeah.
not good. Um, so we started digging, and being that we're a federally regulated organization under the Maritime Transportation Security Act, we started getting everything together and telling people that needed to be told at the national level. And the whole idea was we're going to get this out there, let people know that, hey, we think we got something that's totally weird. Our EDR vendor told us that they had not seen it anywhere else, that they'd only
Right,
seen that web shell at our
right,
in our event. And we're like, oh, that just another ratchet,
right.
making things a little bit higher and hotter.
Right, right. And that's actually like, so when you reached out, obviously I'm continuously compiling notes for breaches of the week. If you watch or listen to this, I go through
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes dozens of breaches that happen. And so when you reached out, I thought it was actually really interesting because basically, when we are looking at this, I mean, the three standards: identify, contain, eradicate, and
Mm-hmm.
essentially you guys seem like you were able to identify what was literally a 0 day. Like, you might have been one of the first in the world, if not the first, to actually have that hit. And so by virtue of that, I'm curious to know what you guys did right in that situation, because most organizations, when they are hit with a possible SolarWinds, or even, let's say, a professionally
Mm-hmm.
run JavaScript file that creates a shell for them, they don't find it for quite some time. FBI statistics say it takes days and days and days and days and days for organizations to find it. So what went
Oh
right
yeah.
for the Port of Houston and your team?
I mean, what went right was just that our immediate reaction and getting everything isolated, getting that server off the internet, getting it off of our internal network. So it was, only could talk to the EDR software, which is like, key, and then getting that immediate snapshot, allowed us to go back and there and start looking at the evidence that was there. EDR started giving us more information, and we're looking at it, and We see where they are, this even kind of made it even feel more like another SolarWinds attack, because we see them moving files around that look like license files
Hmm.
and everything
Right.
else. And then the license file was really all it was them doing, taking compressed files and renaming them and then moving them back out through the network. So it looked like they were trying to, it really looked like the developer was actually in there maintaining them. So, but then we started looking at the command prompt or the command line options that they were doing, and they were completely living off the land. Whatever, comes with, Windows Server and different pieces of software that was on there was, I was like, yeah, this is
Right.
good. These people knew what they're doing. And we're like, we just need to, we need to get somebody in there. So we started reaching out. We called, of course, the National Response Center in DC, and that got us in touch with the Coast Guard, and CISA, and FBI,
Mhm.
and all three of them got involved. And we have a small team. I don't have a team to go and do the in-depth analysis, but the FBI and Coast Guard actually sent boots to Port of Houston to sit there and actually get in there and start doing analysis. And I think that was key also. One of the big things was getting in there and having those folks with more expertise in the time to actually do the analysis. And then actually came back and said, yeah, this was a 0 day.
Wow. Now in that sense, obviously what went right is your EDR. And for those who don't know, that's endpoint detection response, basically next generation antivirus, for those of you that are not familiar with the jargon. Obviously that went right. You identified it, you were able to isolate and contain it. I'm curious to know on the identify side, if either your team or the FBI understood exactly how they got in. I'm assuming the server is exposed in some way to the internet. Maybe it's running a website or a portal login or something like that for the Port of Houston. And so I'm curious to understand in that vein, if you can share it,
Sure.
exactly how did you get hit? What went wrong for the Port of Houston that they were able to get in and attempt to move laterally across the network?
So what we had was this is a piece of product software called AD Self-Service Plus, which is produced by Manage Engine, and that's what uh, had the 0 day in it. And really, we didn't know. We, as the Port of Houston, didn't know what was going on because we were looking at the server, 100% patched, only one vulnerability, and that was one that Microsoft had just released like 3 days before for another print vulnerability. I'm like, crap, really? And so
Oh,
we
wow.
started looking at maybe it was a print vulnerability issue, and had no clue it was AD Self-Service Plus. So, with the help of the FBI and the Coast Guard, they were able to pull that together. So, yeah, that right there left us. We had no clue that it was that software. So, but what we did do is, because we did take it down, we knew that server was kind of odd and acting odd with that activity. We just left it down, and we chose not to restore it just yet. I mean, the whole idea was to, once you take something down, you try, and we actually rebuilt the server, reinstalled all the software, but we left it offline until we got the thumbs up saying that we identified what the problem was.
Right. And I'm assuming by virtue of that, just given that it's a 0 day, did you have any kind of analysis done to assure you didn't have an advanced persistent threat living in the network, meaning they're dormant on other servers and will fire up in 2 weeks once the dust settles kind of
Right. No,
situation?
yeah, well, no, we did. We did do some analysis to see what they did. They did, move to a couple of different servers, but they weren't doing anything yet. They were just doing reconnaissance. So it wasn't like they were actually on there and actually doing some work. They're like, all right, we're looking for a server with a weakness. And basically that's all they were doing. They're pulling down things like the, registry tables and stuff like that, so they could see what the software was. And that was pretty much, we caught them really early in their reconnaissance stage. So it was never, we don't consider it a breach. It's just an incident, critical
Okay.
incident that we stopped before it became a breach.
Right, right. And that's and that's actually one of the reasons why I'm very interested in this, because as I report every Sunday, organizations just don't seem to be on the ball, whether it's a lack of training, a lack of threat detection systems, response times, whatever that is. I every week you can hear me go off for 20 to 40
Hmm.
minutes on the various breaches that we have out there due to vulnerability, due to people just clicking links. And so I think it's an important lesson that I really wanted to share with my audience, that if you're on the ball, if you've got good threat detection capability, you've got a team that is trained to spot these things. And I'm assuming that
And
go ahead.
empowered. I mean, the team
Yeah.
has to be empowered to do things. They just
Yeah.
can't. We got to call the boss first before we do anything. Well, no,
Right.
you guys are empowered to make some decisions.
Right. And that is actually a really excellent point, because one of the other points that I make is that essentially any organization, I don't care if it's a 10-person company or the Port of Houston or anything in between, you have to have a culture that understands that all of your users, if they see something, they have to say something. If they're so afraid that the boss is going to swat them down, or they're going to get in trouble because their computer is running slow or crashing or whatever, oftentimes these things go unreported and then they spread like wildfire. And we all know how
Yeah.
fast data can move. The other aspect of this as well, which is actually something that you mentioned when you had reached out to me, and thank you for that, is that obviously this showed up in the news. I was looking at this as, adding this as just one of the many breaches I was going to do this week. And you had mentioned that you believe some of it was actually kind of misreported and all of that. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I mean, it really, like I said, it wasn't a breach, and it came out like it was a breach, and
Right.
that, I mean, yeah, it was probably an APT that was in there, but yeah, it was just an incident that was caught early. And, some of the reporting just over sensationalized what actually happened. I mean, for a normal organization or SOC that is on the ball, this is just like in any other daily event, except for, this case, we had a 0 day with it. And it really wasn't our intention for this to even to go public. This was all supposed to be, just we did our job and we notified all the proper authorities and everything else. So yeah, we were kind of surprised when it came out in the news on Thursday.
Right. Right. Well, I think it's a lesson to us all, right? I mean, we try to get as
Mhm.
much accurate information as possible. But if you hadn't reached out and I'm reading, oh, in the Port of Houston, I'm reporting on what Reuters or the AP or any
Mhm.
one of those is going to basically be saying about this. And I think it's important to really get that perspective. And in that vein, I'd also be curious to know, just with everything that you said went right. Obviously, they got in, at least temporarily. Unfortunately, you're able to catch it. Is there any advice that you would have for other directors of security or CISOs or whatever the title is,
Mhm.
that we have in the cybersecurity community, just having obviously caught this, gone through this? I'm also assuming that your EDR is an MDR. You're managing that, and so you got
Yeah.
the alerting, and it wasn't just screaming somewhere and somebody was going to check it next week. That you actually had eyeballs on it very quickly for you to say, hey, wait a second, we've got something going on here.
Right.
So I'd be curious to know if you have any advice for those that are going to possibly face this incident or a similar incident in the future.
Really, the thing that I think helped out the most was that my engineer was empowered to do what he needed to do in my absence, and I think that was the key of somebody being able to do it. We're big on paper as far as the port looks like. It's huge. There's critical infrastructure, but we're a
Mhm.
small team. And so my team members have the authority to go and sit there and do something. I'll go and back them up. If, even if they do something wrong, I'll still back them up, right?
Right.
And then we'll have that conversation on the side. But
Right.
no, the thing is that he made the right decision and then reached out and said, hey, we had to do something. So the other thing that was the big thing that I'd say is don't hesitate to reach out. One of the things I was really hoping this to be would be more of like a poster moment for um, public-private sharing of information
Mhm.
to the rest of the world, so we don't have things like Colonial Pipeline that was kind of kept hush hush for a long time.
Right. Right.
So we worked really closely with the FBI here. We worked really closely with CISA and the Coast Guard, and they did us good in helping us get everything done.
Mhm.
It's just unfortunate it was the leak was what it was.
Right. Well, and in that vein, is the Port of Houston also part of an ISAC?
Yes, we are part of the Maritime Transportation Security ISAC.
Okay. Okay. And for my audience that doesn't know, that's basically intelligence sharing among similar verticals. So every state's got one, healthcare's got one, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Maritime has one as well. And so if the Port of Houston sees something, they're able to turn around and tell the ISAC, which will alert all of the other ports. So,
Right.
I think it's a good thing to have.
And then on top of it, we have a Houston region. It goes from everything from Corpus Christi all the way up to the Houston area. A security collaboration group that we all communicate and share information. We usually give it out there first because it's right here regional,
Right.
and then we'll go out to the MTS ISAC and pass it on to them. But
Great.
we didn't want to pass anything on that was fake and unknown yet. That was the hard part about this 0 days. We didn't know all of the indicators, and it took a couple of weeks for even the FBI to develop the indicators.
Right, right. But once you have those IOCs or those indicators of compromise, I, to your point, I think it's really important to share with the world. And that's one of the things. I mean, we may have a hiring deficit severely in cybersecurity, but I think the one thing we're good at is sharing and collaborating, and so you basically being on the forefront of an actual 0 day, first one to get this, kind of thing. I think it's important to get that out there. But I want to thank you for sharing your story here, Chris, because I think it's so important. And if I can devote my normal Sunday time to one single, not a breach, but an incident,
thank you,
that could have been a breach. I think it's important to get that message out there of, these things can be identified, they can be stopped, but I think you need to have the right tools in place, the right training in place, the right empowerment, to your point, in place. And we're going to make the world a whole lot safer if we've got those things in place. And I think so many organizations from small to massive are simply behind because they don't understand the need for spending on things like endpoint detection response systems when the traditional antivirus will do, kind of thing, which is just not the case anymore. So it's an important message, and thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you bring up a good point that the whole EDR bit. If we were still using antivirus because that was a web shell that had never been seen, there's no hash.
No way.
It would never been flagged.
Yeah,
Right?
and that's just, I think, beyond important. That's also why we want good enterprise firewalls and everything else. So thank you very much. And if people want to know more about you or want to connect to you or the Port of Houston or anything, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, and it's Chris Wolski, and Port of Houston. So yeah, feel free to reach out and let me know.
Great.
Connect with me.
Great. And Chris, thank you so much for being here. And to my audience that was expecting me to go through the litany of data breaches this week, obviously next week, we're pretty much going to be doubling up. We don't have to talk about the Port of Houston, though. Hopefully we're done.
We're done.
Else
we're done
for the Port of Houston coming up. And thank you for watching. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Chris.
Thank you.